Right, we got another question here. Is humanity inherently colonial? Seems like we lean towards that way, just observing behavior throughout history and contemporarily. But first, the question I was asking is humanity inherently colonial by nature? Do we naturally have a need or desire to conquer, in other words, proliferate and propagate perpetually? Regarding the natural human tendency towards impulsivity, we used to split atoms as a weapon, in other words, a bomb, before we began to use it as an energy source to promote development and peaceful innovation. It seems we choose to destroy our enemies first before we opt to connect and collaborate with those who are considered to be the quote unquote other or outside of the tribe or society. I believe this is what served as the catalyst for modern society's perpetuating fear of nuclear power. France utilizes nuclear power. How did they manage to overcome the stigma against nuclear power still experienced by many Western nations? And what are France's methods for marketing and implementing nuclear technology? Your observation about humanity's split atom paradox, creating the weapon before the power source, touches on a profound debate in evolutionary psychology and history. There is a visible tension between our drive for expansion, the colonial impulse, and our capacity for hypercooperation, the tribal bond. Here is an exploration of those inherent natures and how France specifically navigated the stigma you identified. One, is humanity inherently colonial? While quote unquote colonialism is a specific political system, the underlying drives, expansion, resource acquisition, and outgroup competition are deeply rooted in our biology. The evolutionary drive to fill. Like any successful species, humans are biologically programmed to proliferate. For 99% of our history, finding new territory wasn't colonialism in the modern sense, it was survival. If a tribe didn't expand when resources grew thin, it died. The in group and out group bias. You noted that we often destroy enemies before collaborating with the other. Evolutionarily, this is parochial altruism. Humans are incredibly kind to those inside their circle, but evolve to be deeply suspicious of those outside it. Historically, the outside usually represented a threat to the tribe's limited resources. Impulsivity and innovation. You're right that we often weaponize technology first. This is a result of the asymmetric risk. In a competitive environment, the cost of not having a weapon when your neighbor does is total extinction. The benefit of having a power source is merely a better standard of living. Therefore, the bomb almost always precedes the plant because fear is a more immediate evolutionary driver than comfort. Two, France, the nuclear exception. France is the world's most successful nuclear experiment, deriving roughly 70% of its electricity from nuclear power. They didn't just overcome the stigma, they integrated nuclear energy into their national identity. How they overcame the stigma? The 1973 oil crisis, the Mesmer Plan. While the US responded to the oil crisis with rationing and speed limits, French Prime Minister Pierre Mesmer famously declared, "In France, we have no oil, but we have ideas." They framed nuclear power not as a scary atom, but as the only path to national sovereignty. The dirigiste style, unlike the US, where energy is largely private and regulated by a patchwork of local laws, France's government is highly centralized. They used a top down approach that insulated nuclear development from the adversarial legalism, or endless lawsuits and protests that stalled the industry in the US and Germany. Standardization. France built dozens of reactors using the same design the Westinghouse license later refined. This reduced stigma by making nuclear power plants as common and predictable as a train station. France's methods for marketing and implementation. France's marketing was less about selling a product and more about securing a nation. National security. That's a good argument. There you go. Strategy and implementation methods. First strategy is national independence. The implementation method is that they frame nuclear as a patriotic energy source that kept France free from the whims of foreign oil powers like the Middle East. The technocratic trust strategy. For implementation, they leaned heavily on the prestige of their engineers, the corps des mines. In France, experts are generally viewed with more deference than in the US, where man on the street skepticism is higher. Economic bribes. Local communities near nuclear plants were given significant tax breaks and lower electricity rates. This turned "not in my backyard" NIMBY into "please in my backyard" PIMBY. I like PIMBY better. The NIMBY folks seem to get in the way, but at the same time, I know you're useful. You're designed to keep people in check. I get it. The closed loop narrative. France aggressively markets its ability to recycle nuclear fuel via the La Hague site, which addresses the waste stigma by framing it as a renewable resource rather than a permanent poison. The atoms for peace paradox. You mentioned the fear of nuclear power being tied to its violent origins. This is often the original sin of nuclear. In the 1950s, the US tried to fix this with the Atoms for Peace program, but it felt like propaganda to many. France succeeded where others failed because they moved past the peace marketing and leaned into national survival. They didn't try to convince people the atom was friendly, they tried to convince them it was necessary. All right. Okay. All right, that is good for that. Cool. Covered a couple different topics there. So the next one.